The $50,000 sat on Frank Morrison's kitchen table like a monument to sacrifice. Crisp hundreds still smelling of the bank, arranged in neat stacks. His calloused hands moved across the bills, every penny of his retirement fund, laid out for his daughter's wedding. 35 years of plumbing calls, crawling through basements, fixing pipes in dead winter. All of it reduced to paper rectangles that would disappear in a single day. Morning sun streamed through the small window, illuminating a framed photo. Sarah in cap and gown, arms around Frank's neck, both grinning like lottery winners. Next to it, his late wife Margaret's wedding ring caught the light in its small dish. "This is for you, baby girl," Frank whispered to the picture. "Everything I've got." The phone rang. Sarah's name lit up the screen. "Hey, sweetheart, you're up early." "Dad, I need to talk to you about something." Sarah's voice carried that tight edge he'd learned to recognize over the years, the tone when she was about to ask for something difficult. Frank settled into his chair, the same wooden chair he'd occupied every morning for the past decade. "What's on your mind?" "It's about the reception tomorrow night." She paused. In that silence, Frank felt something cold settle in his stomach. Marcus's family. They're very particular about these things. Particular how? Another pause. Longer this time. "Dad, you know I love you more than anything in this world, right? Everything I am, everything I've accomplished is because of what you taught me." Frank gripped the phone tighter. In his experience, conversations starting with love declarations rarely ended well. "Sarah, just tell me what's going on." The reception is very formal. Black tie. The guest list is mostly Marcus's father's business associates, country club people. It's not really the kind of crowd that would be comfortable with. With what? "Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is." Frank stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Mrs. Chen tended her garden, the same garden he'd helped plant after her husband died. Normal people, living normal lives, not worrying about whether they belonged at country club receptions. "Sarah, are you telling me I'm not invited to my own daughter's wedding reception?" "You're invited to the ceremony." "Of course you're invited to the ceremony. That's the important part, where I'll actually get married. The reception is it's just a party." Frank closed his eyes. "A $50,000 party." "Dad, please understand. These people aren't like us. They judge everything. How you talk, how you dress, what you do for a living. I don't want them looking down on you. I don't want them whispering behind your back about the plumber who crashed their fancy party." The word hit like a physical blow. Plumber. As if 20 years of being her father, packed lunches, school plays, staying up all night when she had the flu, could be reduced to that single word. "Is that what you think I am, Sarah? Just some plumber who might embarrass you? That's not what I meant, and you know it." Her voice sharpened, defensive. "I'm trying to protect you. These people can be cruel. They'll make comments. I don't want you having to deal with that." Frank looked at the money on his table, then at his reflection in the window. Same face that had watched Sarah take her first steps. Same hands that had braided her hair before school every morning after Margaret died. When had he become someone she needed to protect people from? "So let me get this straight. I can pay for the wedding, but I can't celebrate it with you." "Dad, please don't be like this." "Like what? Like a father who wants to dance with his daughter at her wedding?" "You can dance with me at the ceremony. There'll be music after I walk down the aisle. We can have our moment then." Frank pressed his forehead against the cool window glass. "What does Marcus think about all this?" "Marcus wants whatever makes me happy. And what makes you happy is having a reception without your old man there. What makes me happy is not having to worry about whether you're going to fit in with his family's crowd. What makes me happy is knowing you won't have to sit there and smile while his mother makes little comments about your work clothes or your truck, or the fact that you didn't go to college." The truth of it settled over Frank like a heavy blanket. This wasn't about protecting him from their judgment. This was about protecting her from their judgment of him. "Sarah, I've been looking forward to this day since you were 5 years old and told me you were going to marry a prince. I've been saving for this wedding since you were in high school. I thought. I thought I'd earned the right to be there." Silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. "Dad, the money doesn't mean you've bought your way into their world. It just means you love me enough to give me the wedding I've always dreamed of. And I do love you for that. More than you'll ever know." Frank stared at the stacks of cash. Each bill represented hours of his life he'd never get back. Work that had left permanent aches in his knees and shoulders. All of it freely given, gladly given, for the daughter who was now too ashamed to let him share her happiest day. "I understand," he said quietly. "You do?" "Yeah, sweetheart, I understand perfectly." After Sarah hung up, Frank continued standing at the window, watching Mrs. Chen water her flowers. Simple people, she'd called them, not like us, as if the 20 years he'd spent raising her, loving her, sacrificing for her, had somehow made him less worthy of sitting at her table. Frank picked up Margaret's wedding ring, holding it up to the light. His wife had worn it for 15 years before cancer took her, and it had sat in that dish ever since, waiting for the day he'd have someone to pass it on to. He'd always imagined that day would be Sarah's wedding day, but apparently that day wasn't coming after all. Not the way he'd pictured it, anyway. Frank smiled for the first time since the phone rang. A cold smile that would have surprised anyone who knew him as the gentleman who fixed their pipes and never charged full price for emergency calls. Sarah wanted to protect him from judgment. Did she? Well, maybe it was time to protect her from a few things too. Frank didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table until dawn, staring at the $50,000 and thinking about Sarah's words. These people aren't like us. The phrase echoed in his mind like a challenge. By 6 a.m., he'd made his decision. Frank showered, put on his cleanest work shirt, and loaded his toolbox into his pickup truck. But instead of heading to his usual job, he drove toward Highland Park, where the Wellington family lived. The contrast hit him immediately. Gone were modest ranch houses and chain-link fences. Here, sprawling mansions sat behind iron gates, manicured lawns stretching like golf courses. His work truck belonged here. Rich people always needed something fixed. He pulled into the circular driveway of the Wellington estate. The house was massive. White columns, gleaming windows, the kind of place costing more than Frank would make in 10 lifetimes. Mrs. Wellington answered the door. Even at 7 a.m., she was perfectly put together. Hairstyled, makeup flawless, designer robe probably costing more than Frank's monthly mortgage. Yes, her tone was polite but dismissive. Morning, ma'am. Frank Morrison, Morrison Plumbing. I got a call about water pressure issues in the guest bathroom. She frowned. I didn't call any plumber. Frank scratched his head, looked at his clipboard with practiced confusion. That's strange. Emergency call came in last night. Someone named Wellington. First initial V? That's my name, but I assure you I didn't call anyone. Ma'am, I'm real sorry to bother you, but when we get emergency calls, we respond immediately. Water damage can cost thousands. Frank gestured toward his truck. I drove all the way from downtown. Could I just take a quick look? No charge. If there's no problem, I'll be gone in 5 minutes. Mrs. Wellington hesitated, calculating whether it was easier to send him away or let him check. 5 minutes, she said finally. Guest bathroom upstairs, second door right. Thank you kindly, ma'am. As Frank climbed the curved staircase, he took in everything. Crystal chandeliers, oil paintings, carpet so thick his boots sank into it. This was Sarah's new world. The guest bathroom was larger than Frank's bedroom. Marble countertops, gold fixtures, spa-sized shower. Frank ran the water and listened. Voices drifted from downstairs. Mrs. Wellington was on the phone. Patricia, you should see the demands from her father. $50,000. As if throwing money around could buy him a seat at our table. Frank's hands stilled on the faucet. The man fixes toilets, Patricia. Toilets. Marcus is being patient, but I can tell he's embarrassed. His Harvard friends will be at that reception. What will they think when they meet him? Frank turned off the water, moved quietly to the door. We've handled it beautifully. Sarah agreed he should only come to the ceremony. He gets to walk her down the aisle, play proud father for photos. Then the real celebration begins. With the right kind of people. The right kind of people. Trust me, by next week that little problem will be forgotten. Sarah will settle into her new life and we can pretend her unfortunate background never existed. Unfortunate background. 20 years of raising Sarah alone. Double shifts for her college. Nights he'd gone without dinner for her school clothes. All just unfortunate background to sweep under the rug. Marcus could have had any girl. That lovely Henderson daughter, for instance. But young men have their phases. Thank goodness he'll have proper guidance now. Frank heard footsteps. Her voice got fainter. The important thing is after tomorrow, she'll be a Wellington. We'll civilize her, help her understand how things are done in our circles. Civilize her. Like Sarah was a wild animal needing taming. Frank closed his eyes, took a deep breath. Then he flushed the toilet, ran water again, made notes. When he came downstairs, Mrs. Wellington stood in the foyer, checking her reflection. Everything looks fine, ma'am, Frank said pleasantly. False alarm. Sometimes old houses settle. Pipes make noise that sounds like pressure problems. Old houses? She turned, offended. This house was built in 1987. Like I said, old houses. Frank smiled. No charge today. But if you have real problems, just call Morrison Plumbing. We service all the best neighborhoods. Halfway to his truck, Mrs. Wellington called after him. Morrison? That name sounds familiar. Frank paused. We've been in business 35 years, ma'am. My father started the company. We've probably worked on half the houses in Highland Park. Yes, that must be it. She was already dismissing him. Turning back toward the house. Frank drove 3 blocks before pulling over. His hands shook. Not from fear but anger. He sat replaying every word Mrs. Wellington had said. His phone buzzed. Text from Sarah. Dad, thank you for understanding about tomorrow. I love you so much. Frank stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. Instead, he scrolled through contacts and found a number he hadn't called in years. Tommy? It's Frank Morrison. Remember that business we talked about? The one we said we'd never touch? I'm ready to talk. Tommy the Pipe Rodriguez had been Frank's partner for 15 years. He was also the only person who knew Frank's real secret, the one Sarah was about to discover the hard way. Frank? Jesus, I thought you were never going to call. What changed your mind? Frank watched a Mercedes drive past, its driver ignoring the stop sign. Let's just say I got a reminder about what kind of people we're dealing with. How soon can you meet? Give me an hour. Same place? Same place. Frank ended the call and started his truck. Sarah wanted him to understand his place in her new world. Maybe it was time she understood a few things about his old one. The game was about to change, and Mrs. Wellington had just given him all the ammunition he needed. Tommy the Pipe Rodriguez was waiting when Frank pulled into the parking lot behind Rosie's diner. Same booth they'd used 15 years ago, back corner, clear view of exits, far enough from other tables for private conversations. Tommy looked the same. Stocky build, graying beard, hands telling stories of 30 years in construction. But his truck was different. Instead of the beat-up Ford, a gleaming Silverado sat outside. Custom paint, chrome rims, costing more than most annual salaries. Frank. Tommy stood, extending his hand. You look like hell, brother. Feel worse, Frank slid into the booth. Thanks for meeting on short notice. After what you told me, wild horses couldn't keep me away. Tommy signaled for coffee. So Sarah's getting married tomorrow, and you're finally ready to tell her about Morrison Construction. Frank nodded. Things have gotten complicated. They always do with rich people involved. Tommy leaned back. Tell me about this Wellington family. Frank explained everything. Wedding expenses, Sarah's rejection, his morning visit to the Wellington house, Mrs. Wellington's phone conversation. Tommy listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking his head. Let me get this straight, Tommy said when Frank finished. Your daughter's ashamed because she thinks you're a broke plumber. Meanwhile, you're sitting on a $300 million construction empire. Haven't told her because you wanted to teach her about honest work and family values. That's about right. And these Wellington people are treating her like a charity case they're graciously elevating to their social level, while planning to civilize her, according to the mother. Tommy whistled low. Frank, you could buy and sell that family 10 times over. Morrison Construction built half of Highland Park. We probably built their house. We did. Checked records this morning. 1987 Morrison Construction. Contract worth $2.3 million. Frank sipped coffee. My father's signature on the permit. Jesus. Tommy shook his head. They have no idea. None. As far as they know, Frank Morrison the plumber is completely separate from Morrison Construction the company, which has been convenient all these years. Tommy studied his friend's face. Frank, you've played this game 20 years. What's really changed? Why now? Frank pulled out his phone, showed Tommy Sarah's earlier text. She thanked me for understanding my place, for accepting I don't belong at her reception. That pushed you over the edge. That made me realize I've been protecting the wrong person. Frank put his phone away. I thought I was protecting Sarah from money's corrupting influence. Turns out I should have been protecting her from people who judge others based on money. Tommy nodded slowly. So what's the plan? Show up tomorrow in a Bentley, announce who you really are. Something like that. Frank's smile had no warmth. But I need your help first. You still in touch with our old contacts at major suppliers? The ones who know about our arrangement? Frank, that's dangerous territory. We agreed 20 years ago to keep business and working sides completely separate. If people discover Frank Morrison, the plumber, is the same Frank Morrison who owns Morrison Construction, they're going to find out anyway. Tomorrow at latest. Frank leaned forward. Tommy, I need you making calls. Every major contractor, every supplier, every city official who's worked with Morrison Construction needs to know Frank Morrison will be at Highland Park Country Club tomorrow night. Highland Park Country Club. That's where the Wellington reception is. I know exactly where it is. We built their East Wing in 1995. Frank's eyes were cold. Tomorrow night we're reminding them exactly who paid for it. Tommy stared at his old partner. You're really doing this? Crashing your daughter's wedding? I'm attending my daughter's wedding reception, whether the Wellingtons like it or not. And if Sarah never forgives you. Frank thought about Mrs. Wellington's words. We'll civilize her. If she can't forgive me for refusing to let her new family treat her like a project needing fixing, maybe I raised her wrong. Tommy pulled out his phone. All right, brother, I'm with you. But we're doing this right. No half measures. If we're reminding Highland Park who Frank Morrison really is, we're doing it in style. What did you have in mind? Leave that to me. Tommy was already scrolling contacts. But once we start this, there's no going back. Your quiet life is over. Everyone's going to know the humble plumber working in their neighborhoods 20 years is actually one of the state's richest men. Good. I'm tired of hiding. Frank's phone rang. Sarah's name appeared. Answer it, Tommy said. Act normal. Don't let her know anything's changed. Frank accepted the call. Hi, sweetheart. Dad, I have amazing news. Sarah's voice was bright, excited. Marcus just told me his parents want to meet you before tomorrow's ceremony. They want to thank you personally for everything you've done for the wedding. Frank's jaw tightened. Is that so? Yes. Isn't that wonderful? They're inviting you to brunch tomorrow morning at the country club. Marcus says his mother feels terrible about the reception situation. She wants to explain their side. Make sure there are no hard feelings. Frank looked across at Tommy, who'd caught enough conversation to raise his eyebrows. What time is this brunch, Sarah? 10 o'clock. Marcus will pick you up at 9:30. Oh, Dad, I'm so relieved. I was worried you might be upset, but Marcus's family really wants to make things right. They want to welcome you properly into their circle, even if you can't be at tonight's reception. Into their circle, like he needed their permission to belong somewhere. That's very generous of them, Frank said, voice carefully neutral. I knew you'd understand. Marcus says his mother has ideas about how you might feel more comfortable at future family gatherings. She wants to help you navigate their social world. Help him navigate their social world. Frank thought about the $300 million empire he'd built from nothing. Politicians who took his calls. Business leaders seeking his advice. Charities competing for his donations. I'm looking forward to meeting with her, Frank said. Wonderful. And Dad, wear your good suit tomorrow, okay? The Navy one from my graduation. Marcus says the country club has a dress code. Of course they do. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll make sure I'm dressed appropriately. After Sarah hung up, Frank sat staring at his phone. They want a little chat before the wedding, Tommy observed. Brunch at the country club, so Mrs. Wellington can explain how I can better fit into their world. The same country club that's been trying to get Morrison Construction to sponsor their charity golf tournament for 5 years. The very same. Frank's smile was sharp now. Tommy, change of plans. Make those calls. But tell everyone the show starts at 10 a.m. tomorrow, not 7 p.m. At the brunch, Mrs. Wellington wants to teach me about navigating her social world. Frank stood, throwing money on the table. Time she learned a few things about navigating mine. Frank Morrison adjusted his Navy suit at 8:30 a.m. The same suit from Sarah's college graduation 5 years ago. Back then, she'd been proud to introduce him to everyone who mattered. How quickly things changed. His phone buzzed. Tommy, everything's in place, Frank. Every major construction player knows Frank Morrison will be at Highland Park Country Club this morning. Word spreading fast. Good. Frank straightened his tie. What should I expect? The club manager called me 20 minutes ago. They've been trying to reach you for years about sponsoring their charity golf tournament. They're very excited. Frank smiled grimly. I bet they are. You sure about this? Once you walk in as yourself, there's no going back. Tommy, I've spent 20 years pretending to be someone I'm not. Teaching Sarah honest work matters more than money. Where did it get me? She's ashamed of the work and doesn't know about the money. Maybe she needs both lessons. Frank grabbed his keys. We'll find out soon enough. At 9:30, Marcus Wellington pulled up in a silver BMW, perfectly polished, probably worth more than Frank's supposed annual income. Marcus stepped out looking every inch the privileged lawyer. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, confident stride. But when he shook Frank's hand, something flickered in his eyes. Nervousness, maybe guilt. Good morning, Mr. Morrison. Thank you for agreeing to meet my parents. I'm sure they're looking forward to it. Frank settled into the leather-scented passenger seat. What exactly do they want to discuss? They feel terrible about the reception situation, mother especially. She wants to explain their perspective and make you feel more comfortable at future family gatherings. Make him comfortable, as if the problem was his insecurity, not their prejudice. That's thoughtful. She researched your business. She was impressed you've been operating 35 years. That's remarkable for a small operation. Small operation. Frank bit back a laugh. She researched me? She likes being thorough about family. She found out you've worked all over Highland Park. She's curious which houses you've serviced. Frank could imagine Mrs. Wellington's research. Calling neighbors, checking references, making sure her son wasn't marrying complete trash. I've worked on quite a few Highland Park houses. They drove mostly in silence. Marcus seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at Frank. Frank wondered what Sarah had told him. Probably the usual, hard-working plumber, raised her alone, doing his best with limited resources. All true, just missing key details. Highland Park Country Club sat on 20 pristine acres, its colonial clubhouse commanding perfectly manicured grounds. Frank had been here before. not as a guest, but as the man whose company had renovated the East Wing, upgraded the kitchens, and rebuilt the tennis courts after the 2018 flood. Marcus pulled up to valet. A uniformed attendant approached immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington. Staying long? Just brunch, David. This is Mr. Morrison joining my family." The valet's expression didn't change, but Frank caught the assessment. Nice suit, not custom. Polished shoes, not expensive. Everything screamed trying his best but doesn't belong. If only they knew. Walking toward the entrance, Frank noticed people staring. A woman in tennis whites whispered to her partner. A golfer loading clubs openly stared. Word was spreading, just as Tommy promised. Mrs. Wellington waited in the main dining room at a corner table with views of both golf course and entrance. Perfect positioning. She could see everyone and monitor who was watching. She stood as they approached, extending a manicured hand. "Mr. Morrison, how lovely to finally meet you properly. Victoria Wellington." Frank noted her firm handshake. The way she held eye contact just too long. A woman accustomed to controlling every social situation. "Mrs. Wellington, thank you for inviting me. Please, Victoria, we're family now, or will be in just a few hours." The dining room bustled with Saturday's usual crowd. Golfers, tennis players, families brunching. People Frank had been around all his life, just usually in different contexts. "I ordered coffee," Victoria said, pouring from elegant silver service. "Wasn't sure what you'd prefer." "Coffee's perfect." Frank accepted the fine china cup, noting the club's gold monogram. "Quite a place, we love it. 15 years of membership. Such a wonderful community. Everyone really knows their neighbors, looks out for each other. Where everyone knows everyone's business," Frank translated. "Where outsiders are vetted and rejected. Must be nice having that belonging," Victoria smiled, something calculating in her expression. "That's exactly what I wanted to discuss. Belonging. Our family operates in a rather different social sphere than you might be accustomed to. I worry that might make things awkward." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mother, perhaps we should order." "Nonsense, dear. Mr. Morrison and I are having a lovely conversation." Victoria turned back to Frank. "I respect working people. Honest labor is admirable. But Marcus has certain professional obligations, social commitments. Sarah will need to navigate those waters." Frank set down his cup. "You're concerned I can't help her with that navigation. I'm concerned you might inadvertently make things difficult. Not your fault, you understand. Different social circles have different expectations." "What kind of expectations?" Victoria leaned forward confidentially. "At charity galas, there are protocols, proper forms of address, appropriate conversation topics. Things that come naturally when you've grown up here, but can be intimidating otherwise." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "I can see how that might be challenging." "Exactly. Which is why I thought I might serve as a guide, help you understand the landscape, so when Sarah needs support at these events, you'll be prepared appropriately." She was offering to train him, like housebreaking a pet. Frank glanced around the dining room. More people were staring, trying to be discreet. Near the window, he recognized the club manager speaking quietly with Highland Park's largest bank president. Both were looking his direction. "Very generous, Victoria. Have you always done charity work?" "Oh yes, it's so important giving back. I chair the Highland Park Children's Hospital fundraiser annually. We raised over $2 million last year alone." $2 million? Frank almost smiled. Morrison Construction's charitable foundation had donated $5 million to that hospital just last month, anonymously. "Impressive. I'm sure the hospital appreciates your dedication." "They do indeed. The board is considering naming the new pediatric wing after our family. The Wellington wing has such a lovely ring, don't you think?" Frank picked up his coffee, taking a slow sip. Across the room, the club manager was approaching their table. Practice smile in place. The moment of truth was arriving faster than expected. "Victoria," Frank said quietly, "before we go further, there's something you should know." "Victoria," Frank said quietly, "there's something you should know." The club manager appeared at their table, beaming with excitement. "Mr. Morrison, what a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm James Crawford, general manager. We've been trying to reach you about our charitable initiatives for years." Victoria looked confused. "I'm sorry, James, but this is Mr. Morrison. He's—" "Frank Morrison of Morrison Construction. Yes, your company's work on our East Wing was magnificent. And the tennis courts after the flood. Exceptional craftsmanship." The color drained from Victoria's face. Marcus sat frozen, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Frank smiled politely. "Thank you, James. And your foundation's contribution to Highland Park Children's Hospital last month? $5 million. The board is thrilled. Anonymous donations of that magnitude are rare." Victoria's hand trembled. Five million. "Oh yes, your foundation has been incredibly generous." Crawford turned to Victoria with renewed deference. "Mrs. Wellington, you're so fortunate to have Mr. Morrison joining your family. His reputation in business and philanthropy is impeccable. Frank held up a hand. James, I'm here for a private family meeting. Perhaps we could continue this another time? Of course, but the board would be delighted if you'd consider our invitation to join as a member. We've been hoping to extend that invitation for years. I'll consider it, Frank said diplomatically. Crawford practically glowed. Wonderful. Enjoy your brunch. He retreated, leaving stunned silence. Victoria stared at Frank as if seeing him for the first time. Marcus looked like he'd been punched. I don't understand, Victoria said slowly. Morrison Construction. That's one of the largest companies in the state. The third largest, actually, Frank corrected mildly. But you're a plumber. I am a plumber. I'm also a businessman. I've been both for 35 years. Marcus found his voice. Sarah doesn't know, does she? No. Sarah thinks exactly what you thought 5 minutes ago, that I'm a humble working man struggling to make ends meet. Victoria's mind raced. But why? Why would you hide this? Why would I let you treat my daughter like a charity case you were graciously elevating? Frank's voice had steel underneath. Victoria flushed. That's not, we never, Victoria. 20 minutes ago you offered to train me like a pet, to teach me proper etiquette so I wouldn't embarrass Sarah at charity galas. Frank leaned forward. Charity galas where I've probably donated more money than anyone else in the room. Marcus rubbed his forehead. Jesus Christ! Sarah has no idea. None at all. She spent years ashamed of her plumber father, worried she'd embarrass her in front of people who judge worth by appearance rather than substance. Victoria's mouth opened without sound. Marcus looked stricken. Mr. Morrison, I swear I had no idea. If I had known, what? You would have treated me differently? Been more respectful? Frank studied him. Marcus, that's exactly the problem. Your respect shouldn't depend on my bank account. You're right, Marcus said quietly. God, you're absolutely right. Frank turned to Victoria. You wanted to discuss belonging. I built half the buildings in this neighborhood. My foundation has donated millions locally. My company employs 300 people. I belong here because I've earned the right to. I apologize, Victoria whispered. I had no idea. No, you had no interest in finding out. There's a difference. Frank signaled for the waiter. Could we get the check? The check? Victoria looked panicked. But we haven't ordered. And the wedding, we need to discuss arrangements. What's to discuss? You made it clear I don't belong at Sarah's reception. That hasn't changed. But everything's changed. You're Frank Morrison. Morrison Construction. The foundation. Frank stood, straightening his jacket. Victoria, 5 minutes ago you thought I was a simple plumber and treated me like an inconvenience. Now you know I'm wealthy. Suddenly I'm welcome. What does that tell you about yourself? She had no answer. Marcus stood. Mr. Morrison, please. Sarah's going to find out, isn't she? About who you really are. Frank smiled, and for the first time that morning it reached his eyes. Oh, Marcus, she's going to find out today, at the ceremony, in front of everyone. Victoria went pale. You can't be serious. Dead serious. My daughter is ashamed of an honest plumber, but she might be proud of a successful businessman. Either way, it's time she learned the truth about both sides of her father. Frank pulled out his wallet and laid $100 bill on the table. For the coffee and conversation, it's been illuminating. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Victoria, that pediatric wing the board wants to name after your family? I'd reconsider. The Morrison Foundation just increased our pledge to 10 million. Anonymous, of course, but these things have a way of coming to light. He walked away, leaving Victoria Wellington speechless for perhaps the first time in her adult life. As Frank reached the entrance, Marcus caught up with him. Mr. Morrison. Wait, please. Frank turned. What is it, Marcus? I love her. I love Sarah. This isn't about money or status. I love your daughter for who she is. Frank studied the young man's earnest face. Then prove it, Marcus. When the truth comes out today, stand by her. Help her understand that her father, plumber and businessman, loves her exactly as she is. Marcus nodded. I will. I promise. Frank clapped him on the shoulder. Then welcome to the family, son. The real family. As Frank walked toward the valet stand, he could hear raised voices from inside. Victoria and Marcus were having what sounded like a heated discussion. The afternoon wedding was going to be interesting indeed. The wedding was scheduled for 3 o'clock. By 2:30, Frank Morrison stood in the church parking lot, watching guests arrive in their expensive cars. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, the parade of wealth that defined Sarah's new world. Tommy pulled up in his Silverado, dressed in a sharp black suit Frank had never seen him wear. You clean up nice, Frank said as Tommy approached. Had to look respectable for the show. Tommy glanced at the church. You ready for this? As ready as a man can be to blow up his daughter's wedding. Frank, you sure this is the right move? Once you do this, there's no taking it back. Frank watched another couple walk past. The woman's jewelry probably worth more than most people's houses. Tommy, I spent 20 years teaching Sarah that character matters more than money. Today I find out she's learned the opposite lesson. Either I fix this now or I lose her forever to these people. These people might become your in-laws in about 30 minutes. Not if Victoria Wellington has anything to say about it. Frank checked his watch. She's probably in there right now telling Sarah everything, trying to control the narrative. As if on cue, Frank's phone buzzed. Sarah. Dad, where are you? We need to talk, right now. Her voice was shaking, anger, confusion, maybe both. I'm in the parking lot, sweetheart. Stay there, I'm coming out. The church's side door burst open. Sarah emerged in her wedding dress, the train dragging across the asphalt. Her face was flushed, her carefully styled hair already coming loose. Is it true? She didn't bother with a greeting. What Mrs. Wellington just told me, about Morrison Construction, about you being some kind of secret millionaire. Frank kept his voice calm. What exactly did she tell you? Don't play games with me, Dad. She said you own Morrison Construction. She said you've been lying to me my whole life. She said you have hundreds of millions of dollars, and you let me think we were poor. We were never poor, Sarah. We lived simply. There's a difference. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Simply. Dad, I wore thrift store clothes to school. I worked 3 jobs in college because I thought we couldn't afford tuition. I ate ramen for months because I didn't want to ask you for grocery money. And those experiences made you who you are. They made me ashamed. Sarah's voice cracked. Do you have any idea what it was like, being the scholarship kid? Having rich classmates pity me? And the whole time you could have what? Bought your way through life? Made you another trust fund kid who never learned the value of work? You had no right to make that choice for me. Frank stepped closer, but Sarah backed away, her wedding dress rustling against the pavement. Sarah, listen to me. Everything I did to protect you. From what? From having a normal life? From not being embarrassed about my father's job? From becoming like them? Frank gestured toward the church. From becoming someone who judges people by their bank accounts instead of their character. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed hard. Yeah? Well, congratulations, Dad. Your plan backfired. Because I became exactly that person anyway. Happy? The words stung more than Frank expected. You're not that person, Sarah. You're just confused right now. Confused? Sarah shook her head. No, Dad. I'm seeing clearly for the first time. You manipulated my entire life. You let me struggle, let me feel less than everyone else, all for some twisted lesson about values? It wasn't twisted. I wanted you to understand that money doesn't determine worth. But it does. Sarah's voice rose. It determines everything. Where you live, where you go to school, who accepts you, what opportunities you get. And you had all of it, and you kept it from me. Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking concerned. Sarah, everyone's waiting. Your cousins are asking. Tell them to wait. Sarah snapped, then turned back to Frank. I need to know something. Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you planning to take this secret to your grave? Frank hesitated. That moment of silence was all Sarah needed. Oh my God. You were never going to tell me, were you? You were just going to let me live my whole life thinking my father was a struggling plumber. Sarah, no. She held up her hand. You know what the really sick part is? I excluded you from the reception because I thought I was protecting you. I thought those rich people would make you feel small. But you're richer than all of them, aren't you? Frank nodded slowly. So this morning when I thanked you for understanding about the reception, when I said you didn't belong there, you must have been laughing at me. I wasn't laughing, Sarah. My heart was breaking. Good. The word came out sharp, angry. Now you know how I feel. She turned to go back inside, then stopped. You want to know something ironic, Dad? If I'd known the truth, I would have been proud of you. Not because of the money, but because you built something amazing. You created jobs, helped families, contributed to the community. That's the father I could have bragged about. Instead, I got the lie. She looked at him one more time, tears streaming down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. The ceremony starts in 15 minutes. You can sit wherever you want. Front row, back row, I don't care anymore. But after today, after this wedding, we're done. You'll get your father-daughter dance, since you paid for it. But that's the last thing you'll ever get from me. She walked back toward the church, her train dragging behind her like broken wings. Marcus lingered for a moment. Mr. Morrison, I go, Frank said quietly. Take care of her. Marcus nodded and followed Sarah inside. Tommy walked over, having witnessed the whole exchange. That went about as bad as it could have. Frank stared at the church door. No, Tommy, it went exactly how it needed to. What are you talking about? She just disowned you. Frank pulled out his phone and showed Tommy a recording app. Still running. You recorded that. Every word. Frank stopped the recording. including the part where she admitted she would have been proud of the real me, the successful businessman who built something meaningful. Frank, what are you doing? Teaching one more lesson. Frank straightened his tie. Sarah thinks she knows the whole truth now, but she only knows half of it. There's more? Frank smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Tommy, why do you think I really kept my wealth secret all these years? To teach Sarah about values? Or was there another reason entirely? Tommy stared at his old friend. What haven't you told me? Come on, Frank said, heading toward the church. Time for the final act. And Tommy, whatever happens in there, don't interfere. This has been 28 years in the making. The church was packed. 300 guests, all waiting for the ceremony to begin. Frank took a seat in the third row, not the back as he'd originally planned, not the front where the father of the bride should be. The third row, visible enough to be seen, far enough to maintain distance. The organ music started. The wedding march. Everyone stood. Sarah appeared at the entrance, absolutely stunning despite her tear-stained makeup that had been hastily fixed. She walked alone, no father to give her away. The statement was clear to everyone watching. Frank noticed the whispers starting immediately. People glancing between him and Sarah, putting pieces together. Victoria Wellington sat in the front row, her face a mask of controlled panic. The ceremony proceeded. Vows were exchanged, rings placed on fingers. When the minister asked if anyone objected, the silence was deafening. Frank remained still. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus kissed Sarah. The crowd applauded, and then something unexpected happened. Marcus took the microphone from the minister. Before we recess, I have something I need to say. He looked directly at Frank. Mr. Morrison, would you please stand? Frank rose slowly. Every eye in the church turned to him. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus continued, most of you don't know this, but this morning I discovered something about my father-in-law. Something that changes everything. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. What are you doing? What needs to be done? Marcus said gently, then addressed the crowd again. Frank Morrison isn't just a plumber. He's the owner of Morrison Construction, one of the largest companies in our state. He's been hiding his wealth for 20 years, living as a working man while secretly being worth hundreds of millions. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Frank saw people pulling out phones, presumably Googling his name. But here's what I really learned, Marcus continued. Mr. Morrison, you didn't hide your wealth to teach Sarah about values, did you? That was just the cover story. Frank's eyes narrowed. What was Marcus doing? You see, I did some research after our brunch, made some calls. Interesting thing, Morrison Construction's corporate structure. The company isn't actually in your name anymore, is it, Mr. Morrison? The church fell completely silent. 20 years ago, right after your wife died, you transferred everything into a trust, an irrevocable trust, with one beneficiary. Sarah's face went pale. Marcus, stop. The beneficiary is Sarah, Marcus announced. Sarah has been the owner of Morrison Construction since she was 8 years old. She's been a multimillionaire her entire life. She just never knew it. The revelation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Frank finally spoke, his voice carrying across the silent church. How did you find out? My firm handles corporate law, Mr. Morrison. One phone call to the right colleague and the trust documents were easy to locate. Public record, actually, just buried in legal complexity. Marcus turned to Sarah. Your father didn't hide his wealth from you, Sarah. He gave it all to you. Every penny. He's been living on a plumber's salary for 20 years while you unknowingly owned an empire. Sarah's legs seemed to give out. She sat heavily on the altar steps, wedding dress pooling around her. That's not possible, she whispered. Frank walked forward, stopping at the altar rail. It's true, sweetheart, every bit of it. But why? Why would you do that? Because I made a promise to your mother. Frank's voice was steady, but emotion flickered underneath. Margaret knew she was dying. She was terrified about what would happen to you. Not financially. We had money, but emotionally. She was scared wealth would isolate you, make you a target for people who only cared about your bank account. Victoria Wellington stood up. This is absurd. You can't just hide something like that from your own child. I can, and I did, Frank said firmly. The trust was structured so Sarah would receive control on her 30th birthday. 2 years from now. Margaret and I agreed. By 30, Sarah would be mature enough to handle the responsibility. She'd have lived a real life, made real friends, found real love. He looked at Marcus. She'd find someone who loved her for her, not her money. Marcus nodded slowly. That's why you were testing me this morning. Not about whether I was good enough for Sarah, but whether I loved her without knowing about the money. And you passed, Frank said simply. You defended her even when you thought she came from nothing. Sarah stood unsteadily. So all of this, my whole life, it was all a test. No, baby girl. It was protection. Your mother's last wish was that you get to experience normal life, real relationships, genuine accomplishments, not the gilded cage that wealth creates. But I suffered. I struggled. You lived, Frank corrected. You worked 3 jobs in college. That taught you determination. You ate ramen. That taught you resourcefulness. You wore thrift store clothes. That taught you that appearance doesn't determine worth. Tommy stood up from his pew. Frank, tell her the rest. Everyone turned to look at Tommy. Frank sighed. The rest is that I've been documenting everything. Every sacrifice you made, every job you worked, every challenge you overcame. It's all been recorded in annual reports to the trust. Reports that will be published when you turn 30. Published? Sarah's voice was faint. As a book. The heiress who didn't know. Your mother thought your story could inspire other wealthy families to raise grounded children. She believed your journey from perceived poverty to revealed wealth would become a blueprint for raising kids with values intact. Sarah sank back onto the steps. My mother planned all this? Every detail. She spent her last months designing the trust structure, writing letters you'll receive on your 30th birthday, creating the framework for your life. Frank's voice broke slightly. She loved you so much, Sarah. Everything we did was about protecting that little girl who would grow up without her mother. The church was absolutely silent. 300 people barely breathing, witnessing something none of them had expected. Sarah looked up at Frank, tears streaming down her face. Did you ever want to tell me? Every single day. Every time you struggled. Every time you felt less than others. Every time you doubted yourself. But I made a promise to your mother, and breaking that promise would have meant betraying the last wish of the woman I loved more than life itself. Sarah stood at the altar, her wedding dress trembling as her whole body shook. The church remained silent, 300 guests holding their breath. There's more, Frank said quietly. And this is the part that's going to hurt. Sarah laughed bitterly. More? What else could there possibly be? Frank reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, aged and yellowed. This is from your mother. She wrote it the week before she died. I was supposed to give it to you today, at your wedding. Sarah's hand trembled as she took the envelope. Her name was written across it, in her mother's handwriting. Read it out loud, Frank said. Everyone here should hear this. Sarah opened the letter with shaking fingers. Her voice was barely a whisper at first, then grew stronger. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means you're getting married. It also means your father kept his promise to me. By now you've learned the truth about who you really are. You're probably angry. You might even hate us both. But before you judge too harshly, I need you to understand something. Sarah paused, wiping her eyes, then continued. The Wellington family, yes, Sarah. I knew you'd marry into the Wellingtons. Victoria Wellington and I were roommates in college. We stayed close until she discovered your father and I were wealthy. Suddenly she wanted to be best friends. She introduced me to people who only saw dollar signs when they looked at me. It was the loneliest I'd ever been. Victoria Wellington's face went white. She started to stand, but her husband pulled her back down. Sarah kept reading. When I got sick, Victoria visited me, not out of friendship, but to ask if we'd invest in her husband's failing business. That's when I knew wealth doesn't bring you real relationships, it brings you parasites. The congregation started murmuring. Victoria looked like she might faint. So your father and I made a plan. We would disappear from high society. Frank would become a plumber. Live simply, raise you without the burden of wealth. But here's the secret, my darling. We've been watching the Wellingtons all along. Every business deal, every social move, every financial decision. Waiting. Sarah looked up at her mother-in-law. Waiting for what? Frank answered, for you to marry Marcus. Your mother knew Victoria would push her son toward any wealthy prospect. She also knew Marcus was different from his parents. Decent, hardworking, genuine. She bet everything that if we raised you right, and if Marcus was raised despite his parents, you two would find each other. Marcus stepped forward. This is insane. You're saying our marriage was orchestrated. No, Frank said firmly. Your love is real, but the circumstances that allowed it to happen, those were carefully managed. Sarah, your job at that marketing firm, Morrison Construction is their biggest client. Marcus, your law firm, they handle all our corporate work. You two were always going to meet, but whether you'd fall in love, that was up to you. Sarah's legs gave out completely. Marcus caught her, holding her against him. The conference where we met, Sarah whispered. The one about sustainable building practices, sponsored by Morrison Construction, Frank confirmed, though neither of you knew it. Tommy spoke up from his pew. Frank, tell them about the investigation. Sarah's head snapped up. What investigation? Frank's expression hardened. For 20 years I've had private investigators documenting every interaction between the Wellingtons and other wealthy families. How they treat service workers, how they handle business, how they raise their son. He turned to Victoria. Remember that plumber who fixed your pipes 10 years ago? That was me. The caterer at your anniversary party 5 years ago. My people, the gardeners, the pool cleaners, the contractors, all reporting back to me. Victoria's voice was strangled. You've been spying on us. I've been protecting my daughter from you, making sure that when this day came, Marcus would be worthy of her, even if you weren't." Frank turned back to Sarah. "Your mother's last words to me were, make sure she marries for love, not money, and make sure she understands the difference. That's what all of this has been about." Sarah stood up shakily, Marcus still supporting her. "So my entire life has been what? Some elaborate test? A game between you and Mom and the Wellingtons?" "Not a game," Frank said softly. "A gift. The gift of a normal life. Real friends who liked you for you. Real achievements you earned yourself. Real love that has nothing to do with bank accounts." He looked around the church. "How many of you here became friends with Sarah before knowing about any of this? How many of you loved her when you thought she was just a marketing manager with a plumber father?" Hands slowly raised throughout the congregation. Sarah's college friends, her coworkers, neighbors from their modest neighborhood. Those are your real friends, Sarah. The ones who loved you when you had nothing to offer but yourself. Sarah was crying openly now. "I excluded you from the reception. I was so cruel to you. You were human. You were struggling with class dynamics that have existed forever. But here's the thing, sweetheart. Now you get to choose. You can embrace the wealth and become like Victoria, or you can use it to change things." Frank pulled out his phone. "I have here the transfer documents. Sign them and Morrison Construction becomes yours today, not in 2 years. The choice is yours." The church held its breath, waiting for Sarah's response. Sarah stared at the phone in her father's hand, the transfer documents glowing on the screen. The entire church waited in silence. "I don't want it," she said finally. "Not yet, not like this." Frank lowered the phone. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm not ready. You and Mom were right about that much." Sarah wiped her eyes, smearing what was left of her makeup. "But you were wrong about something else. What's that, sweetheart? You thought hiding the truth would protect me. Instead, it made me insecure. It made me desperate to fit in. It made me the kind of person who would exclude her own father from her wedding reception." Sarah turned to face the congregation, her voice growing stronger. "I need everyone here to understand something. What I did to my father was unforgivable. I let my insecurity about class turn me into exactly the kind of person my parents tried to prevent me from becoming." She looked at Victoria Wellington. "And you encouraged it. You made me feel like my father was an embarrassment. You made me believe that love had conditions based on social standing." Victoria stood up, her face flushed. "I was trying to help you understand our world." "Your world?" Sarah interrupted. "Your world is built on judging people by their bank accounts. Well, guess what? By that measure, my family could buy and sell yours 10 times over. So what does that make you now?" Marcus stepped forward. "Sarah, please. This isn't the time." "No, Marcus. This is exactly the time." Sarah faced him. "Did you know? Any of it?" Marcus shook his head. "I swear to you, I had no idea until this morning. And even then, I only knew about the company, not about the trust or your mother's plan. Would it have mattered? If you'd known I was wealthy from the start." Marcus took her hands. "I'd like to say no, but honestly, it might have. I might have seen you differently, wondered about your motives, questioned if what we had was real. Your parents gave us the chance to fall in love without any of that baggage." Sarah turned back to Frank. "Dad, I need to know something. All those times I struggled, all those nights I cried about not fitting in. Were you ever tempted to tell me the truth?" "Every single time," Frank admitted. "There were nights I stood outside your bedroom door while you cried yourself to sleep, and I had to physically stop myself from going in and telling you everything." "Why didn't you?" "Because your mother was smarter than me. She knew that if you found out at 18 or 21 or even 25, you wouldn't be ready. The money would have changed you before you'd fully formed who you are." Tommy stood up again. "Tell her about the letters, Frank." Sarah looked between them. "What letters?" Frank pulled out his phone again, opening a folder. "Your mother wrote you letters, one for every birthday, every Christmas, every major milestone she knew she'd miss. I have them all. Hundreds of letters. You have letters from Mom? And you never gave them to me?" "They're dated, Sarah. Each one's supposed to be opened at a specific time. Most of them are for after your 30th birthday, when you'd have full access to everything." Frank scrolled through the files. "But there's one here marked for Sarah's wedding day, after the truth comes out." Sarah's hands shook as she took the phone. She read silently for a moment, then began reading aloud, her voice thick with emotion. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, you've just learned the truth and you're probably furious. Good. Anger means you're processing, but don't stay angry too long. Your father gave up everything to keep his promise to me. He gave up his position, his social standing, his comfort, all to raise you as I wished. He became a plumber not because he had to, but because he loved us both enough to honor my dying wish." Sarah paused, tears flowing freely. "The Wellingtons will probably be at your wedding. Victoria was always predictable that way. She'll push her son toward money and status. But I'm betting Marcus inherited his grandfather's character, not his mother's values. Trust your heart, Sarah. If you love him despite thinking you were poor, and he loves you despite thinking the same, then you've found something real. Sarah looked up at Marcus, who was crying too. One more thing, my sweet girl. The money isn't the inheritance. The inheritance is the strength you've built, the character you've developed, the empathy you've learned. The money is just a tool. What you do with it will define who you really are. Sarah handed the phone back to Frank. She knew. She knew everything that would happen. Not everything, Frank corrected. She hoped. She planned. But she couldn't know for sure you'd become the amazing woman you are. Sarah walked to her father, her wedding dress rustling with each step. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Frank pulled her into a hug, not caring about the 300 people watching. You have nothing to apologize for, baby girl. You reacted exactly how anyone would. No, Sarah pulled back. I reacted how a spoiled, insecure person would. But that ends today. She turned to face everyone. The reception is still happening, and everyone is invited. Everyone, I don't care about social standing or bank accounts or any of that anymore. Victoria Wellington stood up. This is highly irregular. You're right, Victoria, Sarah said firmly. It is irregular. Just like my whole life has been irregular. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. Because it made me who I am. And today I finally understand who that is. The Highland Park Country Club's ballroom had never hosted a reception quite like this one. 3 hours after the church revelation, the elegant space buzzed with an energy that transcended social boundaries. The original guest list of 150 had grown to over 300, as Sarah personally called every person she'd ever cared about. Frank stood near the dance floor, watching his daughter move through the crowd. She still wore her wedding dress, but she'd removed the designer shoes, her bare feet a small rebellion against the formality that had once intimidated her. She was greeting everyone with equal warmth, college friends in borrowed dresses mingling with Harvard lawyers in $1,000 suits. Hell of a day, Tommy said, appearing beside Frank with 2 glasses of champagne. That's putting it mildly. Frank accepted the glass. 20 years of planning, and it still didn't go how we expected. You mean it went better? Frank watched Sarah hug Mrs. Chen from their old neighborhood, the same Mrs. Chen he'd helped with her garden after her husband died. Yeah, Tommy, it went better. Victoria Wellington stood in the corner, looking like she'd swallowed something bitter. Her husband had been making apologetic small talk with various guests for the past hour, clearly trying to salvage their social standing. Frank almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Marcus approached, loosening his tie. Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you something. What's that, son? This whole thing, the trust, the investigation, the planning, it's incredible. But I have to know. Were you ever worried it might not work? That Sarah might have ended up resenting you forever? Frank considered the question. Every single day, but here's what I learned from your wife's mother. Sometimes loving someone means taking the biggest risk of all. Margaret risked everything on the belief that if we gave Sarah real experiences, real relationships, real character, she'd choose love over money when it mattered most. And if she'd chosen wrong, then I would have lost her. But she would have been lost anyway, just to different people for different reasons. Frank nodded toward Sarah, who was now dancing with one of her college professors. Look at her, Marcus. Really look at her. Do you see someone who is damaged by struggle, or someone who is strengthened by it? Marcus smiled. I see the strongest person I've ever met, and I fell in love with her when I thought she had nothing to offer but herself. That's exactly what Margaret hoped for. The band leader approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the father of the bride would like to say a few words. Frank set down his champagne glass and walked to the front of the room. The crowd quieted, conversations trailing off as 300 faces turned toward him. 28 years ago, I held my newborn daughter in my arms and made her a promise. Frank began, his voice carrying easily across the room. I promised her that I would do everything in my power to make sure she grew up understanding what really matters in this world. He found Sarah in the crowd, standing beside Marcus near the head table. I thought what mattered most was teaching her that hard work has dignity, that treating people with respect regardless of their job or bank account was important, that real friendships aren't based on what you can do for someone, but on who you are as a person. Frank paused, looking around the room at faces both familiar and strange. But today I learned something new. What matters most isn't the lessons we try to teach our children. It's watching them take those lessons and make them their own, even when they stumble along the way. Sarah wiped her eyes, but she was smiling. My daughter excluded me from this reception because she was afraid I wouldn't fit in with your world. She was protecting me from potential embarrassment. That tells me she learned compassion, even when she applied it imperfectly. A few people chuckled softly. When she discovered the truth about our family's wealth, She was angry, not because she'd missed out on luxury, but because she felt I'd stolen her chance to be proud of my real accomplishments. That tells me she learned to value genuine achievement over inherited privilege. Frank's voice grew warmer as he continued. And when she stood in that church today and announced that everyone was welcome here, regardless of their social standing, she showed me that she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Love isn't about who deserves a seat at your table. It's about making sure there's always room for one more. The room was completely silent now. Margaret, if you're listening, our baby girl turned out just fine. She's got your heart and your strength, and she's chosen a man who sees those qualities even when everything else is stripped away. Frank raised his glass. So here's my toast. Not to wealth or status or social climbing, but to Sarah and Marcus. May your marriage be built on the same foundation your love was, truth, respect, and the kind of friendship that doesn't need impressive credentials to flourish. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Frank stepped down from the microphone as the band struck up a waltz. Dad, Sarah called out, approaching with her arms outstretched. Dance with me? I thought you'd never ask. As they moved onto the dance floor, other couples joined them. Marcus danced with his mother, though Victoria still looked shell-shocked. Tommy swept Mrs. Chen into an enthusiastic two-step that made everyone laugh. Dad, I need to tell you something, Sarah said as they swayed to the music. What's that, sweetheart? I meant what I said about not being ready for the inheritance, but I want to start learning. I want to understand the business, the foundation, all of it. I want to be worthy of what Mom planned for me. Frank spun her gently. You already are worthy, Sarah. You've been worthy since the day you were born. The money is just a tool. What you choose to build with it, that's up to you. I have some ideas about that. Oh, Sarah grinned mischievously. I'm thinking we expand the Foundation's education programs, scholarships for kids who work their way through college, grants for small businesses started by people who've never had family money to fall back on. Sounds like your mother's daughter. And my father's, both the plumber and the businessman. As the song ended, Frank kissed his daughter's forehead. Around them, the party continued with a warmth and authenticity that no amount of money could buy. 1 year later, Morrison Construction's newest project would be a community center in their old neighborhood, built with volunteer labor from Highland Park residents, who'd learned that character matters more than credit scores. But that story was for another day. Tonight was for celebrating the truth that love, when it's real, doesn't need impressive packaging to shine.